The morning fog rolled thick over San Diego Bay as Sarah Mitchell's silver Toyota Camry pulled into the visitor parking lot of Naval Base San Diego. The car was 15 years old, with a dent in the rear bumper and a faded Navy Mom sticker barely visible on the back window. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment, watching the base come to life through the windshield. Young sailors in crisp uniforms hurried across the parking lot, their voices carrying in the cool morning air. A group of them laughed at something on one of their phones, their youth and energy a stark contrast to the woman watching them from behind the wheel. Sarah smiled to herself. She'd been that young once, eager and invincible, thinking she knew everything about the Navy. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Silver hair pulled into a messy bun, minimal makeup, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She wore faded jeans, comfortable walking shoes, and a plain cardigan over a white blouse, the kind of outfit a grandmother might wear to run errands. Perfect. Grabbing her worn thermos from the cup holder, she noticed a coffee stain on the side that hadn't quite washed out. Even better. She took a sip of the lukewarm coffee inside and grimaced slightly. Nothing about her appearance suggested authority, command, or the 42 years of naval service that had brought her to this moment. Sarah stepped out of her car and locked it with a beep that sounded apologetic compared to the roar of fighter jets taking off in the distance. The salt air filled her lungs, a smell that had been home for most of her adult life. She walked toward the main gate, her stride unhurried, her posture relaxed. Just another civilian visitor on a military base. The security checkpoint ahead bustled with morning activity. Young Marines in their dress blues checked IDs with efficient precision. Sailors lined up, badges ready, eager to start their shifts. Sarah joined the visitor line, standing behind a woman with two young children who were excitedly pointing at everything they saw. "First time on a naval base?" Sarah asked the woman kindly. The mother smiled, looking frazzled. "Yes, visiting my brother. He just got stationed here. The kids are so excited they barely slept." "It's quite a place," Sarah agreed, watching one of the children press his face against the glass of the security booth. "Your brother is lucky to have you visit." When Sarah's turn came, the young Marine at the checkpoint, barely 20 years old with a fresh haircut and sharply pressed uniform, looked at her with professional courtesy. "ID and purpose of visit, ma'am." She handed over her driver's license. He scanned it, frowned slightly at his computer screen, then looked up at her with mild confusion. "Ma'am, visitor check-in is actually in Building C, that way." He pointed to a small structure across the parking lot. "You'll need to fill out paperwork and get a visitor badge." Sarah smiled warmly, the kind of patient smile a teacher might give a well-meaning student. "I appreciate your help, young man, but I know where I'm going." "Ma'am, I can't let you through without proper visitor clearance." She leaned forward slightly, her voice still kind but with an edge of something that made him pause. "Son, check your screen again. Look at the clearance code." He glanced down, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. The code on his screen indicated classified clearance levels he'd only seen a handful of times. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "Ma'am, this says." "I know what it says, and I know you're doing your job correctly, but trust me when I tell you I'm exactly where I need to be." The Marine straightened, uncertainty flickering across his young face. He looked at his partner, a slightly older sergeant who glanced at the screen and gave a subtle nod. The barrier lifted. "Have a good day, ma'am," the Marine said, though confusion still clouded his eyes as he watched her walk through. Sarah continued deeper into the base, her thermos in hand, taking in every detail with practiced observation. The base was busier than her last visit 6 months ago. Good. More activity meant more opportunities to assess readiness, to see how personnel responded under pressure, to identify weaknesses before they became catastrophes. A group of sailors rushed past her, nearly knocking her aside. One of them, A junior officer with lieutenant bars gleaming on his collar bumped her shoulder hard enough to slosh coffee from her thermos onto her cardigan. "Watch it, lady," he snapped over his shoulder, not bothering to stop or apologize. His companions laughed, and they continued their rushed conversation about weekend liberty plans. Sarah stopped, dabbing at the coffee stain with a tissue from her pocket. She watched them go, memorizing the lieutenant's face, the swagger in his walk, the way he treated someone he perceived as beneath his notice. Lieutenant J.G. Marcus Webb, according to the name tape on his uniform, she'd remember him. She would remember him very, very soon. Continuing toward the administrative complex, Sarah passed the commissary where a maintenance worker unloaded supplies from a truck. He glanced at her and called out, "Ma'am, you look a little lost. Can I help you find something?" "I'm fine, thank you," she replied with a gentle smile. "You sure? Visitors sometimes get turned around. This is a big base." "I appreciate your concern, but I've been finding my way around naval bases since before you were born." The worker chuckled, shaking his head good-naturedly. "All right, ma'am, you have a good one." Sarah walked on, approaching the operations center, a secure, nondescript building that served as the nerve center for naval operations in the entire Pacific region. 2 armed guards stood at the entrance. She could see through the windows that something was happening inside. Officers moved with urgent purpose. Screens glowed with tactical displays. She checked her watch, right on schedule. Taking another sip of her lukewarm coffee, Admiral Sarah Mitchell, 3-star admiral and newly appointed commander of Naval Surface Forces Pacific, prepared to walk into the chaos she knew was waiting inside. It was time to see what her people were really made of. The operations center's heavy steel door required a security code. Sarah entered the 12-digit sequence from memory and heard the magnetic lock release with a soft click. As she pulled the door open, a wave of sound hit her, voices raised in argument, radio chatter crackling through speakers, the insistent beep of alert systems demanding attention. The room was large and dimly lit, dominated by massive screens displaying real-time tactical information from across the Pacific Theater. Dozens of workstations formed a semicircle around the central command platform, each manned by officers and analysts whose faces glowed blue in the reflected light of their monitors. The air conditioning couldn't quite overcome the heat generated by so much electronics and so many stressed bodies. Sarah slipped inside, letting the door close quietly behind her. No one noticed her entrance. Every eye was fixed on the main display screen, where a crisis was unfolding in real time. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood at the central command console, his back rigid with tension, his hands gripping the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles had gone white. The same officer who'd bumped into her minutes ago and couldn't be bothered with an apology. Now he was in command, and the weight of it was crushing him. "Talk to me," Marcus's voice cracked slightly, betraying his fear. "What am I looking at?" A petty officer at the radar station responded, her voice tight with urgency. "Sir, we have multiple surface contacts approaching Carrier Strike Group 7. Range, 42 nautical miles and closing. Speed, 30 knots. They're not responding to hails on any frequency." Sarah moved silently along the back wall, positioning herself in the shadows behind a row of filing cabinets. From here, she had a perfect view of the entire operations center. She set her thermos down quietly on a desk and folded her arms, watching. "IFF," Marcus demanded, referring to the identification friend or foe system. "Negative, sir. Transponders are active but showing wrong codes. They're broadcasting as military vessels, but the codes don't match any known friendly forces." "Chinese?" another officer asked from the intelligence station. "Unknown could be. The codes are scrambled or corrupted. We can't get a clear read." Marcus spun to face the tactical display, his eyes darting across the screen where green icons represented the American carrier group. The USS Gerald R. Ford and her escorts, 30 ships total, 5,000 personnel, billions of dollars in equipment, and enough firepower to level a small country. The red icons approaching them blinked ominously. "Where's Commander Peterson?" Marcus asked, his voice rising. "Still off base, sir. Medical appointment. He's been notified and is en route, but—" "How long?" 20 minutes minimum, maybe 30 with traffic. Marcus's face went pale. 30 minutes. The unknown vessels would be within weapons range in less than 15. This was his call, his responsibility, his career, or his catastrophe. Sarah watched him cycle through panic, doubt, and forced bravado in the span of 3 seconds. She'd seen it before. Young officers suddenly thrust into command, their training warring with their fear, their textbook knowledge colliding with the visceral reality that their decisions would have consequences measured in human lives. "Options," Marcus said, trying to steady his voice. "Give me options." A lieutenant commander at the weapons station spoke up. "Sir, we can authorize the strike group to go to battle stations, get fighters in the air, show them we're ready." "That's escalation," another officer countered. "If these are friendly vessels with equipment malfunction, we'd be pointing weapons at allies." "And if they're not friendly," the weapons officer shot back, "we'd be sitting ducks." Marcus pressed his palms against his temples. "Communication, keep trying to raise them. Try Chinese frequencies, Russian, Korean, hell, try Morse code if you have to. I need to know who they are." "Still no response, sir." Sarah noticed something on the tactical display that made her eyes narrow. A shadow, barely visible on the screen, a ghost return that the junior officers were completely missing. While they focused on the surface contacts, something else was moving beneath the waves. Grid reference Echo 7. She leaned forward slightly, confirming what she suspected. "What about PACFLET?" an ensign asked nervously. "Shouldn't we alert Pacific Fleet Command?" "And tell them what?" Marcus snapped. "That we have unidentified contacts and I don't know what to do. That'll look great on my record." "Better than starting World War III, someone muttered. The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Officers began talking over each other, their voices blending into a cacophony of conflicting advice. Sarah could see the command structure fragmenting, discipline giving way to fear. This was exactly what she'd come to assess, not just their procedures, but their ability to maintain cohesion under pressure. Marcus raised his voice. "Everyone shut up, let me think." But thinking clearly was impossible in this environment. The red icons continued their steady approach. 38 nautical miles now. The clock on the wall ticked forward with merciless precision. 11 minutes until they entered maximum weapons range. Sarah shifted her weight, considering whether to intervene. Not yet. She needed to see how far this would go, how Marcus would handle it when pushed to his limit. Sometimes leaders discovered their strength in crisis. Sometimes they broke. "Sir," the radar officer's voice cut through the noise. "I'm picking up electronic emissions from the contacts. They're powering up fire control systems." The room erupted in chaos. "That's a hostile act. We need authorization to engage. Someone call PACFLET right now." Marcus's hand hovered over the communications console, trembling. One button would authorize the carrier strike group to treat these contacts as hostile. One button would give them permission to fire first, ask questions later. The weight of that decision paralyzed him. Sarah watched the submarine contact on Echo 7 continue its silent approach, invisible to everyone in this room except her. They were looking at the wrong threat entirely. The surface vessels were a distraction, possibly accidental, possibly deliberate. But that submarine was the real danger. A female ensign at a peripheral station suddenly noticed Sarah standing in the shadows. Her eyes widened in confusion. An unauthorized person in the operations center during a crisis. She stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Ma'am," the ensign called out. "Ma'am, this area is restricted. You need to leave immediately." Several heads turned. Sarah met their confused stares calmly, her expression revealing nothing. Marcus spun around, his face flushed with stress and now anger. Finally, something he could control. Who the hell let a civilian in here? Sarah said nothing. She simply looked at the tactical display, then back at Marcus. "Security," Marcus shouted. "Get her out of here, we have a crisis." Two military police officers appeared from their station near the door, moving towards Sarah with professional courtesy but clear intent. She still didn't move. Instead, she spoke quietly, her voice somehow carrying across the chaotic room. "That submarine at Echo 7. Has anyone tracked its bearing?" The chaos in the operations center seemed to freeze for a split second. Every officer within earshot of Sarah's words turned to stare at this gray-haired woman in civilian clothes who had just mentioned a grid reference that shouldn't have meant anything to her. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice dripping with barely controlled fury. The stress of the crisis was finding an outlet, and this intruder had just made herself the perfect target. "What did you just say?" Sarah didn't flinch under his glare. She gestured calmly toward the tactical display with her coffee-stained thermos. "Echo 7, you have a submarine contact there. Has anyone been tracking it?" The two MPs hesitated, unsure whether to remove her or wait for the lieutenant's order. Marcus took 3 quick steps toward her, his face reddening. "Lady, I don't know how you got in here. I don't know what you think you heard, but this is a classified military operation. You are in serious violation of—" "Check Echo 7, Sarah interrupted, her voice unchanged, not louder, not aggressive, but carrying a weight of authority that made Marcus stumble over his next words. "Check it now." "Sir," the ensign who had first spotted Sarah looked between them uncertainly. "Should I call security or—" Marcus's jaw clenched. "No. First, I want to know how a civilian knows our grid references and how she knows we have a submarine contact. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one time. Who are you and how did you get access to classified information?" Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I'm someone who's spent more time reading tactical displays than you've been alive, Lieutenant. And I'm telling you that while you're focused on those surface contacts—" She nodded toward the main screen where the red icons continued their approach. "You're missing the real threat." "The real threat," Marcus laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "We have multiple unknown vessels approaching a carrier strike group with active fire control radars, and you're talking about—" "A submarine," Sarah finished. "Chinese Type 93 attack submarine if I'm reading that signature correctly. It's been shadowing your carrier group for the past 40 minutes and it's now positioned inside your defensive perimeter. Those surface vessels," she gestured dismissively, "they're a distraction. Look at their approach vector. They're not maneuvering for attack, they're following a civilian shipping lane." An analyst at one of the side stations, a young man with thick glasses and nervous energy, had been listening. His fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up the data for Grid Echo 7. His face went white as bone. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, there is a contact at Echo 7, submerged. I have it on passive sonar now. How did I miss this?" The room went silent. Even the background chatter of radio communications seemed to fade. Marcus turned slowly from Sarah to the analyst, his expression caught between disbelief and dawning horror. "What?" "Submarine contact, sir. Grid Echo 7, it's been there. Oh God, it's been there for 37 minutes. The system flagged it as a biological, probably a pod of whales, but the signature—" His fingers trembled as he enhanced the display. "It's definitely man-made, diesel-electric, matches Chinese Type 93 characteristics." Another officer leaned over to confirm. "He's right, sir. It's a submarine, running silent, and it's inside the Aegis defensive ring." Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. A submarine, inside their defenses. While he'd been focused on the obvious threat, the real danger had slipped past them, and a random civilian had spotted it before any of his trained analysts. "How did you?" Marcus started, then shook his head. "It didn't matter. Battle stations. Alert the strike group. I want that submarine localized and tracked. Weapons free if it makes any aggressive moves." "Wait," Sarah said. "Wait," Marcus spun on her, his fear converting to anger again. "Lady, I don't care who you think you are, but there is a Chinese submarine inside our defensive perimeter, and I am not going to." "It's not Chinese," Sarah said calmly. She stepped closer to the tactical display, ignoring the MPs who moved to intercept her. Something in her bearing made them pause. "Look at the acoustic signature. The reactor noise is wrong for a Type 93. That's American engineering. Virginia class, if I had to guess." The sonar analyst was already checking. His eyes widened. She's right. The signature matches Virginia-class parameters, but we don't have any Virginia-class submarines scheduled in this area, do we? "Communications," Sarah said, her voice taking on a more commanding tone. "Hail that submarine on Secure Channel Delta. Use authentication code Whiskey 7 Bravo. They'll respond." "Sir?" The communications officer looked at Marcus, who stood frozen, his mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. "I do it," Marcus said weakly. The communications officer's fingers moved across his console. Static filled the speakers, then a voice crackled through, calm, professional, tinged with amusement. "This is USS Colorado. We've been wondering when you'd notice us. We've been conducting a stealth penetration drill. Your defensive screen has more holes than Swiss cheese, folks. Recommend reviewing your sonar protocols. Colorado out." The room erupted in a mixture of relief and embarrassment, a training exercise. The submarine was friendly, one of their own, testing their defenses, and they'd failed spectacularly. Marcus felt his legs go weak. He gripped the edge of the console for support, and the surface contacts. Sarah was already back at the tactical display. "Analyst, pull up the current position of the Taiwanese training group that left Kaohsiung 3 days ago." The analyst hesitated, looking at Marcus. The lieutenant nodded numbly. Data appeared on screen. The positions matched. "They're Taiwanese," Sarah said. "Friendly vessels. Their IFF codes are corrupted because they recently upgraded their systems and the integration isn't perfect yet. It's a known issue. There's a bulletin about it that came through PACFLET 3 days ago." An ensign at the communications station quickly searched their message traffic. "Here it is, sir. Warning about Taiwanese IFF code anomalies during their system upgrade period. It's dated 3 days ago, filed under routine advisories." Marcus wanted to disappear. Every decision he'd almost made, scrambling fighters, going to battle stations, possibly authorizing weapons release, every single one would have been catastrophically wrong. He'd nearly created an international incident, nearly fired on allies because he'd missed a routine bulletin and failed to detect a friendly submarine running a drill. And a civilian in a coffee-stained cardigan had seen it all clearly within seconds. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow. Before Sarah could answer, the operations center doors burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. Commander James Peterson rushed in, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, his face flushed from running. He'd clearly abandoned his medical appointment and broken several traffic laws getting here. His eyes swept the room, taking in the scene, the confused officers, the tactical display, and then finally landing on Sarah Mitchell standing calmly in the center of it all. His face went from flushed to pale in an instant. Every muscle in his body snapped rigid. "Admiral Owen Deck," the words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "Admiral Owen Deck." For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. The officers' brains struggled to process what they'd heard, to reconcile Commander Peterson's words with the gray-haired woman in civilian clothes standing before them. Then muscle memory and years of training kicked in. Chairs scraped, bodies shot upright. The entire operations center erupted into motion as every person snapped to attention, spines straight, chins up, eyes forward. Coffee cups clattered. Someone's tablet hit the floor with a plastic crack. The sudden silence after so much chaos was deafening. Marcus Webb felt his stomach drop through the floor. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. The blood drained from his face, leaving him dizzy. Admiral. The woman he'd dismissed, the woman he'd ordered removed, the woman he'd spoken to with contempt, she was an admiral. The two military police officers who had been moving to escort Sarah out now stood frozen, their faces masks of horror. One of them had actually had his hand extended to take her arm. That hand now hung in midair, trembling. Sarah, Admiral Mitchell, looked at Commander Peterson with an expression of mild amusement. "Commander Peterson, I see you received the urgent recall." Peterson remained at attention, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Yes, ma'am. I came as quickly as possible. I didn't know you were already on base." "That was rather the point, Commander." Sarah's voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. "I wanted to see how your operations center functioned without advance notice, without everyone on their best behavior because the brass was watching." She let that sink in for a moment, her eyes sweeping across the room. Every officer stood rigid, most of them staring straight ahead, terrified to meet her gaze. She could feel the fear radiating from them, the fear of career-ending reprimands, of disciplinary action, of having failed spectacularly in front of a three-star admiral. Marcus felt like he might vomit. His mind replayed every interaction with her in excruciating detail. Bumping into her outside, not apologizing, telling her to watch it, calling her lady with contempt, ordering her removed from the operations center, speaking to her with condescension and anger. Oh God, he'd raised his voice at her. He'd threatened her with security violations. His career was over. It had to be. You didn't speak to admirals the way he'd spoken to her and walk away unscathed. He thought of his parents, how proud they'd been when he earned his commission. He thought of his girlfriend, who'd stuck with him through deployment after deployment. All of it gone because he'd been too stressed and too arrogant to show basic respect to someone he'd assumed was beneath him. Sarah walked slowly past the rows of officers standing at attention. Her comfortable shoes made soft sounds on the linoleum floor. She paused beside the two MPs, who both looked like they wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. "Petty Officer Chen, Petty Officer Rodriguez," she said, reading their name tags. "You were following Lieutenant Webb's orders to remove an unauthorized person from a secure facility. That was correct procedure." Both MPs remained frozen. Chen managed a strangled, "Yes, ma'am." "However," Sarah continued, "before physically removing anyone from an operations center, it's generally wise to verify their identity through proper channels. A quick check of my ID in the system would have shown my clearance level and rank. Did either of you do that?" "No, ma'am," they said in unison, their voices barely audible. "That's a training deficiency we'll address, at ease." The MPs relaxed marginally, though they still looked like they wanted to disappear. Sarah continued her slow walk around the operations center, taking in every detail. The coffee stains on workstations, the filing system that clearly needed organization, the tactical displays showing the now understood situation, friendly submarine drill, allied Taiwanese vessels with faulty IFF codes. She stopped in front of the analyst who'd finally identified the submarine contact. "What's your name?" "Petty Officer Second Class David Park, ma'am." His voice shook slightly. "You found the submarine contact once I prompted you to look. Why didn't you find it 37 minutes ago when it first appeared?" Park swallowed hard. "Ma'am, the system flagged it as a biological contact. Marine mammals. I accepted the automated classification without verifying. It was a mistake. No excuse, ma'am." You're right, no excuse. Sarah's voice was firm but not cruel. Automated systems are tools, Petty Officer Park. They assist judgment, they don't replace it. When a carrier strike group is operating in contested waters, every contact, biological, geological, or otherwise, needs human verification. Understood? Yes, ma'am, absolutely, ma'am. Sarah moved to the communication station. Who's responsible for message traffic and bulletins? An ensign raised a shaking hand. I am, ma'am, Ensign Jennifer Kowalski. The bulletin about Taiwanese IFF codes. It came through 3 days ago. Why wasn't it briefed to the watch officers? Kowalski's voice cracked. Ma'am, it was filed as routine. We get dozens of routine advisories daily. I didn't think it required immediate attention. You didn't think, Sarah repeated. 3 days ago, that bulletin was routine. Today, when unidentified contacts with anomalous IFF codes approach a carrier group, it becomes critical. Intelligence work isn't about processing information, Ensign. It's about anticipating which routine information becomes critical in which situations. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Finally, Sarah turned to face Marcus Webb. He stood at rigid attention, his face pale, his hands clenched so tight his fingernails dug into his palms. She walked toward him slowly, her footsteps the only sound in the silent room. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the laugh lines around her eyes, the silver roots of her hair, the coffee stain on her cardigan. Close enough to see that despite her grandmother appearance, her eyes were sharp as razors, missing nothing. Lieutenant Junior Grade Marcus Webb, she said quietly. Yes, ma'am. His voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Earlier today in the parking lot you bumped into me, spilled my coffee on my sweater. Do you remember what you said? Marcus's throat felt like sandpaper. I said, I told you to watch it, ma'am. You did, and did you apologize? No, ma'am, I did not. Why not? The question hung in the air. Marcus knew there was no good answer, because he'd been in a hurry, because he hadn't thought a civilian warranted his time, because he'd been too self-important to show basic courtesy. No excuse, ma'am, he finally managed. Sarah nodded slowly. No excuse. And then when I entered this operations center, when I tried to help, what did you do? I ordered you removed, ma'am. I threatened you with security violations. I was disrespectful and dismissive. Ma'am, You were also, Sarah interrupted, her voice still quiet but carrying clearly across the room, in the most difficult position a junior officer can face. Sudden command. An apparent crisis. No senior leadership present. Incomplete information and a ticking clock. Marcus blinked, confused. Was she defending him? You made mistakes today, Lieutenant Webb. You missed critical intelligence. You failed to verify automated classifications. You allowed the pressure to fragment your command structure. And yes, you were rude to a stranger in a parking lot and dismissive to someone trying to help. She paused. But you also did something important. What was it? Marcus's mind raced. What had he done right? He'd nearly started an international incident. He'd missed obvious threats. He'd failed at almost every level. I don't know, ma'am. You hesitated, Sarah said. When you had your hand on that weapons authorization, when every instinct probably screamed at you to act, to do something, to assert control, you hesitated. You asked for more information. You didn't pull that trigger. Do you understand how important that was? Ma'am. Hesitation saved lives today, Lieutenant. Your instinct to pause, to question, to seek clarity before committing to violence, that's the mark of someone who understands the weight of command. You need to sharpen your skills, yes. You need to read your bulletins and verify your data, but that core instinct, that hesitation, don't lose that. Too many officers act without thinking and people die. Marcus felt something release in his chest. She wasn't ending his career. She was teaching him. Now, Admiral Mitchell said, her voice rising to address the entire room. We have approximately 7 minutes before this situation resolves itself naturally. I suggest we use that time wisely. Commander Peterson. Yes, ma'am. Your operations center needs work. Commander James Peterson straightened further if that was even possible. Yes, ma'am, I understand. I take full responsibility for. Admiral Mitchell raised a hand, cutting him off. We'll discuss responsibility later, Commander. Right now, we have a training exercise to conclude properly and protocols to implement. She turned to face the main tactical display, her entire bearing transforming in an instant. The grandmother in the cardigan vanished completely. What remained was 42 years of command authority, thousands of hours on bridge watches, countless crises managed, and an intimate knowledge of naval warfare that came from living and breathing it since before most of these officers were born. Lieutenant Webb, you still have the con until Commander Peterson formally relieves you, so let's finish this properly. What's the current status of Carrier Strike Group 7? Marcus struggled to shift mental gears from terror to operational thinking. Ma'am, the strike group is at Condition 3. They're aware of the surface contacts but have not gone to battle stations. The submarine contact, the USS Colorado, they're tracking it now. Good. Communications. Get me the Colorado's commanding officer on secure voice. The communications officer, still standing at attention, scrambled to his console. Yes, ma'am. One moment. While he worked, Admiral Mitchell addressed the tactical team. Petty Officer Park, pull up the complete acoustic profile of the Colorado's approach. I want a full track from initial contact to present position. Show me exactly how they penetrated your screen. Park's fingers flew across his keyboard, grateful to have a concrete task. Yes, ma'am, pulling it up now. The tactical display shifted, showing a time lapse of the submarine's approach over the past hour. It was mortifying. The Virginia-class submarine had glided through multiple defensive layers like they didn't exist, exploiting thermal layers, timing its movements with merchant traffic overhead, using the carrier group's own noise against them. Analyst, Admiral Mitchell said, not taking her eyes from the screen. What do you see? Park studied the display, his analytical mind engaging despite his nervousness. Ma'am, they used the morning thermal layer to mask their initial approach. Then they timed their movements with the strike group's own maneuvering. Every time the escorts shifted position, they advanced. And here, he pointed to a specific moment. They went directly under a merchant vessel's track, using its propeller noise to cover their own. Correct. They're also using a tactic called sprint and drift, short bursts of speed, then going silent. Your passive sonar was picking up the noise but categorizing it as biological because the pattern matched whale pods, a clever bit of programming by Colorado's crew. She turned to face the room. This is exactly why we conduct these drills. On paper, your defensive screen looked adequate. In practice, a single submarine made you look like amateurs. The words stung, but nobody could argue. The evidence was right there on the screen. Ma'am, the communications officer called out, I have Commander Sarah Chen of the USS Colorado on secure voice. Put her on speaker. A woman's voice filled the operations center, crisp and professional but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. This is Commander Chen, Colorado. I understand we've been detected. Eventually, Sarah, this is Admiral Mitchell. There was a brief pause, then Chen's voice returned with noticeably more formality. Admiral, I didn't realize you were observing the exercise personally. Surprise visit. Your crew did excellent work. How long were you inside the defensive perimeter before they noticed you? 37 minutes, ma'am. We were starting to wonder if we should send up a flare. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the operations center. Admiral Mitchell's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. That won't be necessary. Conclude your drill and proceed to your next waypoint. And Sarah, send me your complete exercise report. I want to know every single hole you found in their defenses. With pleasure, ma'am. Colorado out. The connection clicked off. Admiral Mitchell turned back to the tactical display. Now, the surface contacts. Lieutenant Webb, what's your assessment now that you know they're Taiwanese? Marcus stepped forward, his confidence slowly returning. Ma'am, they're following standard training group protocols. Based on their bearing and speed, they'll pass at a safe distance from the carrier group. No threat assessment required. And if you'd escalated, if you'd scrambled fighters or gone to battle stations? Marcus's face darkened. We would have created an international incident, ma'am. The Taiwanese are allies. Pointing weapons at them because of faulty IFF codes would have damaged diplomatic relations and made us look incompetent. Exactly. War by mistake, Lieutenant. It's killed more people throughout history than war by intention. She pointed to the display where the Taiwanese vessels continued their steady course. Communications. Hail the Taiwanese Task Force Commander. Inform them of their IFF code issue and recommend they switch to backup transponder system Alpha until they complete their software upgrade. Yes, ma'am. Also send a message to PACFLET. Tell them the Taiwanese IFF problem is worse than initially assessed and recommend issuing an alert-level advisory instead of routine. Ships need to be aware this is ongoing. Right away, ma'am. Admiral Mitchell walked to the central command platform, her movements economical and purposeful. Every officer tracked her with their eyes, watching as she transformed the chaotic operations center into a precisely functioning machine. Orders flowed smoothly. Information moved efficiently. The panic of 10 minutes ago seemed like a distant memory. Petty Officer Park, start a comprehensive review of all biological contacts logged in the past 72 hours. Cross-reference them with known submarine operating areas. If Colorado got through, I want to know if anyone else did too. Yes, ma'am, on it. Ensign Kowalski, you're going to develop a new protocol for message traffic prioritization. I want a system that flags advisories that could become operationally critical. We'll review it tomorrow at 800. Yes, ma'am. Kowalski looked simultaneously terrified and determined. Commander Peterson, you and I will be conducting a full review of standing orders, watch protocols, and training standards. Schedule it for this afternoon. Yes, ma'am, I'll clear my calendar. Admiral Mitchell surveyed the room one more time. The crisis, such as it was, had been completely resolved. The submarine was identified. The surface contacts were confirmed friendly. The carrier strike group continued its operations without incident. But the real crisis, the one that mattered, was the complacency and gaps in procedure that had been exposed. Lieutenant Webb, she said quietly, step forward. Marcus's heart rate spiked again, but he moved to stand before her. Ma'am. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice pitched for his ears but loud enough that the nearby officers could hear. Today was a catastrophe. You missed critical intelligence, failed to maintain command discipline, and nearly made decisions that could have ended careers and damaged international relations. She paused, letting that sink in. But you also kept your head when it mattered most. You asked questions. You sought information before acting. And when I offered help, even though you didn't know who I was, you listened. Eventually. Marcus didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Tomorrow morning, 600, my office. We're going to review everything that happened today step by step. You're going to identify every mistake, explain what you should have done differently, and develop a plan to ensure it never happens again. Understood? Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Good, now finish your watch. Commander Peterson will relieve you at the normal time. Do everything by the book from here on out. Yes, ma'am. Admiral Mitchell picked up her thermos from where she'd left it on the desk. The coffee inside had gone completely cold, and the stain on her cardigan had set. She looked down at it and smiled slightly. Well, she said to no one in particular, I suppose I need to work on my choice of undercover attire. This cardigan's seen better days." The tension in the room broke slightly. A few officers managed hesitant smiles. Admiral Mitchell headed toward the door, then paused and turned back. "One more thing. The security guard at the main gate, the young Marine who questioned my clearance. Someone make a note that he performed his duties correctly. He checked my ID, he questioned authority, he verified before granting access. That's exactly what we need. Make sure his chain of command knows he did well." "Yes, ma'am," Commander Peterson said. She nodded and walked out, the heavy door closing behind her with a soft click. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. Then, collectively, the entire operations center seemed to exhale. The operations center remained in stunned silence for a full minute after Admiral Mitchell departed. Officers stood frozen at their stations, processing what had just happened. Finally, Commander Peterson cleared his throat. "Well," he said, his voice deliberately steady, "I believe we all learned something today. Return to your stations. We still have a carrier strike group to monitor, and I expect flawless performance for the remainder of this watch." The room slowly came back to life, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Officers moved with careful precision, double-checking everything, speaking in measured tones. The casual confidence that had permeated the center earlier had been replaced by acute awareness that mistakes had consequences, and that they were being watched, evaluated, and judged. Marcus Webb returned to the command console, his legs still shaky. He pulled up the tactical display and began systematically reviewing every contact, every piece of data, every message in the queue. His hands moved across the controls with exaggerated care, as if one wrong move might detonate a bomb. Commander Peterson moved beside him, speaking quietly. "Breathe, Marcus." "Sir, I know what you almost did. We all know, but you didn't do it, and that's what matters." Peterson glanced at the main display. "For what it's worth, I probably would have made the same mistakes, maybe worse. The Admiral was right, you hesitated at the critical moment. That took courage." Marcus shook his head. "It wasn't courage, sir, it was fear. I was paralyzed." There's a fine line between the two. Sometimes wisdom looks like hesitation from the outside. Peterson squeezed his shoulder. "You survived your first real crisis. Many officers don't handle it as well. Learn from it." Across the base, Admiral Mitchell walked through the corridors with purposeful strides, her comfortable shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floors. She dropped the shuffling grandmother walk entirely. Now she moved like what she was, a senior officer with places to be and limited time to get there. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Admiral Richardson's office," a crisp voice answered. "This is Admiral Mitchell. Is John available?" "One moment, ma'am." A click, then a familiar baritone voice. "Sarah, how's the Pacific treating you?" "Like the Wild West, John. I've been on base for 4 hours and already found a command center that couldn't spot a submarine if it surfaced in their coffee pot." Admiral John Richardson, Chief of Naval Operations, chuckled. "That bad?" "That bad, but fixable. I'm seeing a lot of young talent that just needs proper training and leadership. Peterson's good people. He's just been stretched too thin. His operations center is running on minimal manning with inadequate rest cycles. They're exhausted, which leads to mistakes." "Sounds like you're building a case for more personnel." "I'm building a case for better resource allocation. These kids are working 16-hour shifts because we don't have enough qualified watchstanders. Fatigue is a security risk." She paused at a window overlooking the harbor, watching a destroyer glide past. "But that's a conversation for next week. Right now, I need you to authorize something." "I'm listening." "I want to expand this surprise assessment program across all Pacific installations. Unannounced visits, civilian clothes, the works. I need to see how our commands actually function when they're not putting on a show for brass." Richardson was quiet for a moment. "You know that's going to make you extremely unpopular." I'm a 3-star Admiral, John. Popular went out the window 20 years ago. Sarah smiled slightly. Besides, I'd rather be unpopular and have commands that can actually fight than be beloved and lose ships because nobody wanted to hurt anyone's feelings. Point taken. I'll authorize it, but Sarah, be careful. Some of these commanders have big egos and powerful friends. Then they should run better operations. Talk soon, John. She ended the call and continued walking, her mind already planning the next phase. The operations center was just one piece. She needed to assess their maintenance protocols, their training standards, their readiness metrics. Real readiness, not the inflated numbers that looked good in PowerPoint presentations to Congress. Admiral Mitchell entered Building 12, a nondescript administrative structure that housed her temporary office. Her actual office was still being prepared. She'd only officially taken command 3 days ago, but she'd insisted on starting assessments immediately. No time to waste on ceremony when there was work to be done. Her aide, Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, stood as she entered. Santos was a sharp officer in her early 30s, handpicked by Mitchell for her no-nonsense attitude and exceptional organizational skills. "How'd it go, ma'am?" Santos asked, though her knowing smile suggested she'd already heard through the base grapevine. About as expected. One traumatized lieutenant, several embarrassed officers, and a command center that now understands what a surprise inspection really means. Sarah dropped into her chair with a sigh. "Get me Commander Peterson's personnel files. I want to see who he's working with. Also, pull the training records for everyone in that operations center for the past 6 months." "Already on your desk, ma'am," Santos gestured to a thick folder. "I figured you'd want them." "This is why I picked you, Maria." Sarah opened the folder and began reading. Her eyes moved quickly across the pages, absorbing details, making mental notes. Half these officers are overdue for advanced tactical training. 3 haven't had proper rest cycles in weeks, and nobody's completed the new submarine warfare module. "Budget cuts, ma'am. Training funds were reallocated to maintenance." "Wonderful, so we can't detect submarines because we're too busy painting ships." Sarah made a note on her tablet. "Schedule a meeting with PACFLET's training command. Tomorrow if possible. We're going to fix this." Santos was already typing. 900 tomorrow work. Captain Harris can meet then." "Perfect. Also, send a message to Lieutenant Webb. Tell him his 600 meeting tomorrow is postponed to 800. I want him to get some actual sleep first. He looks like he hasn't rested in days." "Yes, ma'am." Santos paused. "If I may say so, you're being generous with him. A lot of admirals would have crucified an officer for speaking to them the way he did." Sarah looked up from the files. Webb made mistakes, but they were the mistakes of an exhausted junior officer thrown into a crisis without proper support. That's not his fault, it's the system's fault. My job isn't to punish people for the Navy's institutional failures. My job is to fix those failures. Even if it makes you unpopular. Especially then. Sarah returned to the files. The Navy doesn't need admirals who are popular. It needs admirals who make sure our sailors can actually do their jobs when it matters. Popularity is for politicians. Santos smiled. "Yes, ma'am, is there anything else?" "Coffee strong, and see if you can find me a clean cardigan. This one's ruined." As Santos left, Sarah leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of reflection. The Operations Center assessment had revealed exactly what she'd suspected. Good people working in a broken system, making do with inadequate resources and insufficient training. It was a pattern she'd seen throughout her career, and it drove her crazy every single time. But unlike many of her peers who simply complained about the problem, Sarah Mitchell had spent her entire career fixing it. One command at a time, one officer at a time, one corrected procedure at a time. It wasn't glamorous work. It didn't come with medals or ceremonies, but it was the work that saved lives when the shooting started. She pulled out her notebook, old-fashioned paper, because computers could be hacked, and began writing her assessment. Detailed observations, specific failures, concrete recommendations. By the time she finished, it was 15 pages of single-spaced notes that would make Commander Peterson's life difficult for the next 6 months. But his operations center would be better for it. His officers would be better trained. His systems would be more robust. And when the next crisis came, and it always came, they would be ready. That was worth a little unpopularity. Her phone buzzed with a message from Santos. Coffee inbound. Also, you're trending on base social media. #ThermaAdmiral. Sarah laughed despite herself. Well, at least they were paying attention. She had 6 more installations to assess this month. Time to see who else needed a wake-up call. 3 hours later, the operations center had returned to normal watch rotation. The crisis, if it could even be called that, was fully resolved. The USS Colorado had completed its penetration drill and departed to continue its patrol. The Taiwanese task force had switched to backup transponders and was proceeding on course. Carrier Strike Group 7 continued its operations without incident. Everything was back to routine. Except nothing felt routine anymore. Admiral Mitchell had requested that all officers involved in the morning's events assemble in Conference Room B at 1400 hours. It wasn't a request anyone considered declining. Now, 23 officers sat around the long conference table, their uniforms immaculate, their postures rigid. The air was thick with anxiety. Commander Peterson sat at one end of the table, Admiral Mitchell at the other. She'd changed out of her civilian clothes and now wore her service khakis, 3 stars gleaming on her collar. The transformation was complete. There was no trace of the grandmother in the cardigan. This was a flag officer in full command authority. Marcus Webb sat halfway down the table, his stomach in knots. He'd spent the past 3 hours replaying every moment, every mistake, every word he'd spoken to her. The more he thought about it, the worse it seemed. He'd prepared himself for the worst: formal reprimand, removal from his posting, possibly even a court-martial for disrespecting a superior officer. Admiral Mitchell stood, and the room fell into absolute silence. She walked slowly to the front of the room where a large display screen showed the tactical replay of the morning's events. The submarine's approach, the Taiwanese vessels, the moments of confusion and near panic. "Let me begin," she said, her voice calm and measured, "by saying that what happened this morning was both deeply concerning and oddly encouraging." Confused glances were exchanged around the table. Concerning because you failed at multiple levels. You missed critical intelligence. You failed to detect a submarine for 37 minutes despite it being well within your defensive perimeter. You allowed automated systems to override human judgment. You didn't read essential bulletins, and your command structure fell apart under relatively minor pressure. She let that hang in the air for a moment. But encouraging because when it mattered most, you didn't fail completely. You asked questions. You sought verification. You hesitated before potentially catastrophic action. And ultimately, no one was hurt, no international incidents occurred, and we're all sitting here learning from it. She clicked a button, and the display showed the moment when the submarine first appeared on sensors, flagged as biological. "Petty Officer Park, talk me through your thought process here." Park stood, his voice steadier than it had been that morning. "Ma'am, the system classified the contact as biological based on acoustic signature patterns. I glanced at it, saw the classification, and moved on. I trusted the automation without verifying." "Why?" "Because we get dozens of biological contacts daily. Whales, dolphins, large fish schools. It seemed routine." And that's exactly what the Colorado's crew was counting on. They studied your patterns, understood your procedures, and exploited your trust in automation. Admiral Mitchell advanced the display. Modern naval warfare isn't just about weapons and tactics. It's about understanding how your enemy thinks, how they operate, what shortcuts they take. The Colorado didn't beat you with superior technology. They beat you with superior psychology. She turned to face the room. Every single person in this room is trained, capable, and dedicated. I don't question your commitment or your competence, but commitment without vigilance is just noise. Competence without critical thinking is just procedure. You need both. Ensign Kowalski raised her hand hesitantly. Ma'am, about the Taiwanese bulletin. Stand up, Ensign. Kowalski stood, her face pale. Ma'am, I made a judgment call that a routine advisory didn't require immediate briefing. That judgment was wrong, and I take full responsibility. Your judgment was wrong, Admiral Mitchell agreed. But let me ask you something. How many routine advisories do you process in a week? 50 to 70, ma'am, sometimes more. And how many of those become operationally critical? Maybe 5%, perhaps less. So you're processing dozens of documents, most of which are genuinely routine, and you're expected to somehow divine which ones will become critical 3 days later when circumstances change. Admiral Mitchell shook her head. That's not a personal failure, Ensign. That's a systemic failure. The problem isn't that you didn't flag it. The problem is that we don't have effective systems for flagging it. That change is starting now. The tension in Kowalski's shoulders eased slightly. Yes, ma'am. Admiral Mitchell's gaze swept across the room. Here's what I want you all to understand. Today wasn't about catching you making mistakes. Today was about identifying where our systems fail, where our training is inadequate, where our procedures need improvement. You are not the problem. You're the symptom of larger institutional issues that I intend to address. She clicked to another slide showing a list of corrective actions. Over the next 90 days, this command will undergo comprehensive review and improvement. New training protocols, better rest cycles, improved message prioritization systems, enhanced human-in-the-loop requirements for automated classifications. This is not punishment, this is investment. Marcus found himself breathing easier. This wasn't a witch hunt. It was actually about making things better. However, Admiral Mitchell's voice hardened slightly. There is one issue we need to address that's not systemic. It's cultural. The room tensed again. This morning, I walked onto this base in civilian clothes, and I was dismissed, ignored, and treated with casual disrespect by multiple personnel. That's not a training failure. That's a character failure. She looked directly at Marcus. Lieutenant Webb, stand. Marcus stood, his heart hammering. Here it comes. You bumped into me this morning, spilled my coffee, didn't apologize. Later, you spoke to me with contempt, dismissed my input, and ordered me removed. All because you assumed I was just some civilian who didn't matter. She paused. Why? Marcus swallowed hard. Ma'am, I was stressed, I was rushing. I made assumptions based on appearance and I was wrong, completely wrong. You were wrong about who I was, but were you wrong to treat me that way? Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Why? Not because I'm an admiral. Why is it wrong to treat anyone that way? Marcus understood what she was asking. Because basic respect isn't about rank, ma'am. It's about human dignity. I should have apologized to you whether you were an admiral or a janitor. I should have listened to your input whether you were in uniform or not. The discourtesy wasn't about misjudging your rank. It was about failing to treat another person with basic respect. Exactly. Admiral Mitchell's expression softened slightly. Rank commands obedience. Respect must be earned through character. This morning, multiple people judged me by my appearance. Gray hair, civilian clothes, coffee-stained cardigan, and found me wanting. That's natural human bias. We all do it. But good officers recognize that bias and overcome it. She addressed the entire room. In the field, wisdom can come from unexpected sources. A young enlisted sailor might spot something a captain misses. A contractor might have critical information. A foreign liaison might offer crucial insight. If you dismiss input based on who it comes from rather than what it contains, you will fail, and people will die. The room sat in absolute silence, absorbing her words. So here's your real lesson for today. Not about submarines or IFF codes or tactical procedures. Those are technical skills you can learn. The real lesson is this: approach every person, every situation, every piece of information with humility. Assume you might be wrong. Assume others might be right. Assume that expertise doesn't always wear the uniform you expect. She smiled slightly. After all, the most dangerous threats often come from the places you're not looking. Admiral Mitchell returned to her seat. Questions? No one spoke. Good, dismissed. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start fixing these problems properly. As officers filed out, Admiral Mitchell called, Lieutenant Webb, a moment. Marcus's stomach dropped again, but he approached her. Ma'am. She handed him a folder. Your 800 meeting tomorrow. I've prepared a study guide. Everything we're going to discuss. I want you prepared, rested, and ready to learn. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Good, and Marcus, you're going to be a fine officer. You just needed to learn this lesson early. Some officers never learn it at all. For the first time all day, Marcus felt something other than dread. He felt hope. 2 months later, the story of Admiral Sarah Mitchell's unannounced visit had become legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet. It spread from ship to ship, base to base, carried by sailors who heard it from someone who knew someone who'd been there. With each retelling, the details sharpened, the lessons embedded deeper into the fleet's collective consciousness. She became known as the Thermos Admiral, the ghost who walked among them in civilian clothes, testing their readiness, their judgment, their character. Officers stopped making assumptions about people based on appearance. Enlisted sailors paid attention to everyone with courtesy and respect. Security personnel verified credentials more carefully, and operations centers across the Pacific suddenly became much more vigilant about submarine contacts, no matter how routine they seemed. But the real changes went deeper than legend. Commander Peterson's operations center had undergone complete transformation. New training protocols were implemented. Rest cycles were enforced religiously. A sophisticated message prioritization system, developed by Ensign Kowalski herself, now flagged potentially critical advisories. Petty Officer Park had become the base's leading expert on submarine acoustic signatures, his natural analytical skills finally paired with proper oversight and confidence. The operations center that had nearly sparked an international incident was now one of the most effective in the fleet. Other commands began requesting tour, asking how they'd achieved such dramatic improvement in such a short time. The answer was always the same: Admiral Mitchell. Marcus Webb stood outside Admiral Mitchell's office at precisely 7:55 hours, the same office he'd visited dozens of times over the past 8 weeks. The first meeting had been brutal, 6 hours of detailed analysis of every mistake, every missed opportunity, every failure in judgment. She'd been relentless but never cruel, pushing him to understand not just what he'd done wrong, but why. The subsequent meetings had been different. She'd become his mentor, teaching him things the Naval Academy never covered: how to read the subtle dynamics of a stressed team, how to recognize when subordinates were afraid to speak up, how to create an environment where truth flowed upward regardless of rank. Today was different. Today he had news. Come in, Marcus. Admiral Mitchell's voice called before he could knock. She had an uncanny ability to know when someone was outside her door. He entered to find her behind her desk, reviewing reports on her tablet. She'd become a fixture on the base, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not, always observing, always teaching. Officers had learned to look for her in unexpected places: the maintenance hangar, the enlisted mess hall, the overnight watch stations. Sit, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. You look like you're about to burst. What is it? Marcus sat, unable to contain his smile. Ma'am, I received my promotion orders this morning, full lieutenant, and I've been accepted to the Naval War College for advanced tactical training. Admiral Mitchell set down her tablet, a genuine smile crossing her face. Outstanding. Well deserved. When do you start? 3 months, ma'am. I'll finish my rotation here first. Good. You've earned it, Marcus. You've grown more in these past 2 months than most officers do in 2 years. She stood and walked to her window, looking out over the harbor. You know why I'm recommending you for these opportunities? Because I learned from my mistakes, ma'am. Partly, but more importantly, because you demonstrated something rare, the ability to transform failure into wisdom. Many officers make mistakes. Few truly learn from them. You did. She turned back to face him. Do you remember what you said to me that day? Watch it, lady. Marcus felt his face flush. Yes, ma'am, I'll never forget it. Good, don't forget it, but also don't let it define you. You were exhausted, stressed, and operating in a broken system. The discourtesy was wrong, but it doesn't make you a bad officer. Your response to being called out, that's what makes you a good one. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a thermos, identical to the one she'd carried that first day, coffee stain and all. I want you to have this. Marcus took it carefully, confused. Ma'am. Call it a reminder, not of your mistake, but of your lesson. Every officer needs something to keep them humble, to remind them that wisdom comes from unexpected places, that respect isn't about rank or appearance. She smiled. Plus, terrible coffee tastes slightly better from a battle-scarred thermos. Marcus laughed, feeling emotion tighten his throat. Thank you, ma'am. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just pay it forward. When you're the senior officer, when you have young lieutenants making mistakes under your command, remember this. Be tough, be demanding, but always leave room for growth. Yes, ma'am, I will. After Marcus left, Admiral Mitchell returned to her reports, but her mind wandered. Her unannounced assessment program had expanded to 17 installations across the Pacific. Some commands had responded well. Others had resisted. She'd made enemies among officers who preferred comfortable predictability over uncomfortable excellence. She didn't care. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lieutenant Commander Santos. Admiral Richardson wants to speak with you. He says it's about extending your assessment program to the Atlantic Fleet. Sarah smiled. The ripples were spreading. That evening, she walked through the base one more time, this time in her uniform, returning salutes, acknowledging greetings. But she noticed something that pleased her immensely. A young ensign helping an elderly contractor carry equipment. A chief petty officer patiently explaining procedures to a nervous civilian technician. A security guard carefully verifying credentials for everyone, regardless of how they looked. Small changes, subtle shifts, a culture slowly transforming. Near the main gate, she spotted the young Marine who'd originally questioned her clearance that first morning. He stood at attention as she approached. Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, Corporal. How's the gate watch treating you? Very well, ma'am, I heard I received a commendation for that morning, for questioning you. You did your job correctly. That deserves recognition. Thank you, ma'am. It's an honor. He hesitated. Ma'am, if I may ask, do you really walk around in civilian clothes testing people? Sarah's eyes twinkled. Corporal, if I answered that, it wouldn't be much of a test anymore, would it? He grinned. I suppose not, ma'am. Just remember, treat everyone with respect. Verify what needs verifying. Trust your training. If you do that, you'll never have to worry about who might be testing you. Yes, ma'am. Admiral Sarah Mitchell continued her walk, past the ships sleeping in the harbor, past the sailors heading to night watch, past the machinery of military life that never truly stopped. She thought about Marcus Webb and his thermos, about operations centers that now questioned their automation, about a fleet slowly learning that true authority didn't announce itself with stars and stripes. It showed up, did the work, and earned respect through action. Tomorrow she'd visit another base, another surprise assessment, more officers who needed to learn these lessons. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Navy was getting better, one thermos at a time. The end.